The Jews in the United States are some of the most blessed and privileged Jews of any group at any point in all of human history. This is a golden age for Jews. That's not to say that there aren't anti-Semitic incidents. That's not to say that Jews have not been the subject of anti-Semitism in the United States in the past. But to claim in 2025 that Jews should be worried that we're at the cusp of anti-Jewish pogroms in the United States at the same time that Palestinians and Turks and anti-genocide protesters more generally are being abducted off the streets for their speech is a shocking level, as you said, a cartoonish level of self-aggrandizement and self-righteousness. We are witnessing the greatest crackdown on free speech since the Red Scare.
Hello everyone, I'm Rania Kalik and this is Dispatches. After a year and a half of genocide in Gaza, the propaganda used to justify the most depraved acts of live-streamed mass murder ever is in overdrive. Israel and its supporters carry out these atrocities in the name of protecting Jews and preventing another Holocaust. This is an obvious scam. The American Jewish establishment that's defending Israel's actions does not represent all Jews. Neither does Zionism, and certainly the genocide in Gaza doesn't either. Israel is the tip of the spear of U.S. empire in the Middle East, and U.S. empire uses Judaism as a human shield against the people of the region. Increasingly, we're seeing the Trump administration and its allies weaponize claims of fighting anti-Semitism to justify fascist policies at home, like abducting protesters off the street for their speech. How did it get this bad? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Zachary Foster, a historian of Palestine. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. If you want to support independent media that challenges mainstream propaganda, become a Breakthrough News member and access the full episode at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode to help us get the word out. Zachary, welcome back to Dispatches.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on again. So quite a bit has changed since I last had you on. I had you on sometime at the second half of last year, and now we have a new administration that's doing all kinds of horrific things. Same horrific things the last administration was doing, with some added new horrors, especially domestically, and doing much of it in the name of protecting Jews and fighting anti-Semitism, which you've been very vocal against, and you've been calling out quite a bit. And so I kind of wanted to start off by asking you about one of your recent tweets about the, quote unquote Jewish establishment. You tweeted about how many American Jews are horrified by what's happening in Gaza, yet you said they remain silent out of fear of being excommunicated from their communities. And you argue that the American Jewish establishment has elevated Israel above all else, turning it into a kind of idolatry. I'm partly quoting you there. And you reference specific organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, Hillel, the Jewish Federation. And you said they're not just complicit, but they're akin to the collaborators of past fascist regimes. So those are some strong words. I was hoping to maybe unpack some of it with you and talk about some of the deeper historical implications. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you on that. What made you say those things?
Well, over the past 18 months, we've witnessed the Holocaust of our times. Let's just say it straight out. We're talking about the most horrific use of violence that I've ever seen in my life, live streamed on social media in real time with the support of the United States, of the UK, of Germany, half of Europe, much of the rest of the world as well, India, Argentina. And when you see day after day after day the images coming out of Gaza and the West Bank and Lebanon and Syria and now Yemen with beheaded children, with Palestinians with their limbs severed, incinerated by 2,000-pound bombs, shot in the head by quadcopter drones, day after day after day for 18 months. And then you see your own community, your own family members, your own close friends standing in silence at the same time that in private they express horror. How can you not speak out against that? And I think the reason why they are silent is because they know very, very well that if they speak out, they will face retribution from their own communal leaders and the American Jewish establishment. And I'm using that phrase loosely, but there is an American Jewish establishment. Let's not lie about that. There are a dozen some organizations. I listed out a few of them in that tweet. There are many, many others, by the way. Those are just some of the most prominent. Um, these organizations have a religion. It's not Judaism, although they claim to be Jewish institutions. The reason it's not Judaism is because they don't hold any Jewish values sacred. They don't hold God sacred. Half of the presidents of these organizations are atheists. They certainly don't hold any Jewish religious texts sacred, not the Torah, the five books of Moses, not the Tanakh, not Nevi'im and Ketuvim, the other two books within the uh, sacred Jewish canon. They don't hold the Talmud sacred. They don't hold the Mishnah sacred. They don't hold the Shulchan Aruch sacred. They don't hold any Jewish values sacred, like treat other people the way you want to be treated. That's what we learn in Pirkei Avot, in the sayings of our fathers. Treat others the way you want to be treated. When Rabbi Hillel was asked, summarize the entire Torah standing on what foot? One foot. That's what he said. Treat others the way you want to be treated. That's not sacred. Kashrut is not sacred. Shabbat is not sacred. Love and empathy and respect is not sacred. No Jewish principle is sacred. But there is one thing that is sacred, and that's the state of Israel. And not just the state of Israel, the state of Israel as a Jewish state. Because if you say Israel should be a state for all of its citizens, or even Israel should be a binational state, or Israel should be a state like any other state that has a civic religion based on shared values, like in the United States, where we have shared values around democracy and separation of powers and empowerment of civic society and an independent judiciary and a free press. Those things aren't sacred either. There's the only thing that is sacred is Israel should single out one group of people within its borders, the Jews, uh, and give them special privileges and special rights. And so when and so if you criticize that principle, you will be excommunicated from the American Jewish establishment. You cannot be the president of AJC and say Israel should be a state of all its citizens. You cannot be the president of Hillel International and say Israel should be a state of all of its citizens. And so what they've done is they've elevated Israel. That is the core principle of the American Jewish establishment, is Israel as a Jewish state. And if you challenge that, you're excommunicated. And it's so infuriating when you have so many respectable members of your own community who, after 18 months, have refused to say a single word about what is happening in Gaza at a time when the UN yesterday just put out a statement saying the famine conditions in Gaza are worse than they've been at any point in the last 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, it is really infuriating, but it's interesting. I mean, okay, so you say the word excommunicated. I understand the idea of like, oh, you can't be the president of like the ADL or the American Jewish Committee if you oppose the genocide in Gaza. But you're talking about kind of like your average person here that maybe you're speaking to behind closed doors. So like explain, like walk me through what it means to be excommunicated. Like, does your family stop talking to you? like what are the consequences of speaking out on this issue? Because there's clearly a real policing going on.
Yeah. It means that none of these organizations are willing to host you at an event. They will not hire you for a job in their rank and file. Your family members uh, will not be willing to appear in social media posts with you. You post a photo with a family member and they ask you to take it down. You get uninvited from Thanksgiving dinners because you have the wrong political views, because you think genocide is a bad thing. That's what I mean by excommunicated. It's a very personal level. It happens at the professional level as well, and it happens at the leadership level. where if you look at the rank and file and the board of trustees of all of these organizations and the board of directors of all of these organizations, they will not allow a single person to be part of these, the rank and file of the staff, the leadership of the organizations, and the board of directors. 100% of them, ADL, AJC, Hillel International, B'nai B'rith International, not a single person, a single director on any of those boards, a single staff member in any of those organizations, a single even member of those organizations uh, can express anti-Zionist views, can say Israel should just be a state that doesn't care what your religion is. That is heretical. I mean, there was a video that was shared a few weeks ago of an innocuous video of a man who I believe he was going to see his a soccer game or a basketball game at a JCC, a Jewish community center. I forget where it was now, and he was wearing a keffiyeh, and he was booted out of the JCC for wearing a keffiyeh. I mean, there's a total outcasting of anything and everything anti-genocide.
Basically, want to make you feel like you're crazy. And then there's the other aspect of this too. And I just want to clarify, even though there's obviously these consequences, I still would highly encourage people to speak out despite them, because you'll be on the right side of history if you do. Um, but this is an interesting aspect to this, because there's the organizations you mentioned, which are more like mainstream Jewish organizations in North America. But then there's organizations like this one. Um, Sorry, let me actually go to it. This is the Beitar organization, which is basically like a fascist organization. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but begun making lists of diaspora Jews who they want to recommend Israel ban from entering. And I mean, it's just, lists of Jews they disagree with. And this is just one, like they're literally pointing people up by name. Just for supporting Palestine. And then there's other like really, really ridiculous lists they've made. Like, I just want to show this one where it's so crazy. Like, here we go. It's worth looking at. This one is a bunch of Jew, literally, like they made like a little
Infographic.
thumbnail, yeah, infographic. It says Jews not allowed in Israel, and I don't know if it's big enough for people to see. Who There's a few people I do see on there. I think there's Peter Beinart, Naomi Klein. I see Medea Benjamin on there, Simone Zimmerman. It's just anybody who's ever uttered a word of support for Palestine or who's actually like an activist on that issue. But I just kind of want you to talk about this side of things, because these organizations are actually also, like Beitar, giving the Trump administration lists of people to deport. That's kind of where they're looking to decide who to go after. So I'm just curious your thoughts on this and the sort of historical context of this mentality.
I wonder if we can start with the historical context.
Yeah, yeah,
Be
please.
Beitar was inspired by it originally dates to the 1930s. You had a party, a Zionist party in Palestine at the time, known as the Revisionist Zionists. This was led by Ze'ev Jabotinsky, who in 1923 published a tract called The Iron Wall, the same name that Israel used in its recent ethnic cleansing operations in the northern West Bank, calling that Operation Iron Wall, Kir Brazel, in which it ethnically cleansed some 40,000 Palestinians from the Jenin refugee camp, the Nuri Shams refugee camp, and the Tulkarm refugee camp. And Ze'ev Jabotinsky published that tract in 1923, in which he says that the Palestinian Arabs are a national group. They have strong ties to the land. They are not going to go quietly into the night. They will resist. They will not accept subjugation. No people has and no people ever will. They consider themselves the indigenous population, and they consider us the settlers and the colonizers, and they will fight. And he was right about that. And so ever since, they've been establishing these militias. In the 1930s, the militias were known as the Lechi Gang and the Stern Gang, and these militias, they organized sort of youth movements. Think of the Nazi SS. That was the true inspiration. That was the inspiration for these groups. They derived their they were inspired by the fascist movements in Europe. And so this is almost this Beitar worldwide organization that is putting out these lists of Jews. They are the intellectual heirs of the revisionist Zionists, as was Netanyahu, who himself was an heir of the revisionist Zionists. The Likud party itself is an heir of these revisionist Zionists, who, after coming to the realization that the natives are going to resist, themselves came to the realization that there's therefore only one option. There's only one option, that is removal, expulsion. And so what we are witnessing is a group called Beitar, which is putting out lists of Jews who ought to be banned from Israel. They're also giving lists of anti-genocide activists to the Trump administration uh, to get these kids deported. And by the way, when I hear about lists of Jews being put together who are who should not be allowed to enter certain countries or should be deported from certain countries. Well, guess what's the first thing that comes to my mind? It's Nazi Germany in the late 1930s and early 1940s when the Nazi government, when it would invade Poland as it did in 1939, or when it would collaborate with the Vichy regime in France, or the Hungarian Nazis in Hungary, what they would do is they would tell the local authorities in Hungary or France or Czechoslovakia, they would say, give us a list of all the Jews in your country. They would go to Jewish community centers. They would say, give us a list of all the Jews who are members of your Jewish community center. They would go to synagogues and say, give us a list of all the members, the Jewish members of your synagogue. This is what the Nazis did. It's Nazi behavior what we're seeing. And I'm sorry to be so blunt about that, but I can't think of another case in history where you have an organization, where you have a regime or an institution asking for lists of Jews. When was the last time you heard of that happening?
Yeah. Um, it's really insane. And then, you mentioned the fact they're giving lists to the Trump administration of people to deport, including green card holders like Mahmoud Khalil, who's still imprisoned by ICE, and now Mohsen Mahdawi, who is another Columbia university student. Actually, it's just such an insane story. I'm sure you and probably most of our viewers and listeners know at this point. I believe it was 2 days ago, in the middle of his appointment to become a U.S. citizen, was arrested by ICE because of his participation in anti-genocide protests. Just completely insane. So while people are literally being abducted on the streets, you have other people, such as this person I'm going to show, who I still can't believe this because it's just so cartoonishly ridiculous. But this is a clip from the new propaganda documentary, October 8th, executive produced by Deborah Messing, in which Sheryl Sandberg, former chief financial officer, I think, of Facebook, who is a billionaire,
Chief operating
appears.
officer.
Chief operating officer, thank you. She's a very, very, very rich, successful woman who is fine. No one is trying to arrest her. No one is trying to attack her for her identity, but she still feels like a victim and shared that in this clip. I'm going to show it real quick.
I was on a walk with one of my closest friends who's not Jewish. And just out of nowhere, not expecting to say this, what came out of my mouth was, will you hide me? Like, if it comes to that, will you hide me and my family? And like, do I really think that's going to happen in the United States? No. And it was interesting because she didn't really know what I was talking about. She said, what do you mean hide you? And I explained that there are these righteous people that hid Jews. This is the story of Anne Frank. And then, of course, she said, oh, I know what you mean. But any Jew would have known what I meant immediately.
So I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'm just going to go ahead and let you react to that scene we just witnessed by a crying billionaire.
I think Norman Finkelstein would call this crocodile tears.
Right.
The Jews in the United States are some of the most blessed and privileged Jews of any group at any point in all of human history. This is a golden age for Jews. That's not to say that there aren't anti-Semitic incidents. That's not to say that Jews have not been the subject of anti-Semitism in the United States in the past. But to claim in 2025 that Jews should be worried that we're at the cusp of anti-Jewish pogroms in the United States at the same time that Palestinians and Turks and anti-genocide protesters more generally are being abducted off the streets for their speech is a shocking level, as you said, a cartoonish level of self-aggrandizement and self-righteousness. I cannot recall a time in my life when the disparity between the actual bigotry and racism on the one hand and the purported anti-Semitism on the other has been greater. We are witnessing the greatest crackdown on free speech since the Red Scare. You have 400 students over the past few weeks who have been deported as a result of their Palestine speech, as a result of writing innocuous vanilla op-eds calling for their universities to divest from companies profiting off genocide, as did Rumeisa Ozturk. You had Mahmoud Khalil, who was the diplomat at the Palestine Solidarity campus protests at Columbia. He was abducted. Now you had, as you pointed out earlier in this stream, Mohsen Mahdawi, who was, I mean, he went beyond Mahmoud Khalil. I just listened to a podcast, an interview he did yesterday. This guy went out of his way to build bridges with the Jewish Zionists on campus. He met with Shai Davide, the Israeli postdoc or professor, business professor, who was expelled from campus for harassing students and staff. He was literally going around campus, harassing students, following young Muslim women, hijabi women, covered women, harassing them. And for that, he was expelled from campus. Mohsen Mahdawi reached out. He said, Shai, let's sit down for a coffee. Let's talk. And he talks about how the importance of bringing Jewish Zionists together with Palestinians to talk about trauma, to talk about healing, to put everything on the table. By the way, a lot of Palestinians would call that normalization. The guy who is accused by Palestinians of normalization, who reaches across the aisle to try and build bridges. The guy who, by the way, in a speech at Columbia, this video is now surfacing today. He is calling out people who are perhaps bordering on anti-Jewish speech or anti-Semitic speech. He's the first one saying, these people leave our camp. You do not represent us. Please, we do not want to have any part of that. That does not belong in this encampment. He's the one calling out anti-Semites. And let me ask you, what do you call the administration who is abducting the people criticizing anti-Semites? That's called anti-Semitism. So what we have is a situation in which the most diplomatic students, the most innocuous speech, the students reaching across the aisles are being abducted. Why are they being abducted? Because they oppose genocide and because they're Palestinian. I mean, if that's not a level of racism that we've never seen before in this country, I don't know what is. But it's a very scary time right now to be a Palestinian, to be a green card holder, to be anyone who opposes genocide.
If you have a conscience, it's unbearable to be plugged into the corporate media machine right now. These outlets are accomplices in genocide, running cover for the war machine. Breakthrough has become the go-to outlet for those who want something different. But the funds we've used to start this platform are starting to run out. We'd never dream of turning to mainstream corporate funding. So we're turning to you. Become a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can become an essential part of our fight to not just break through the mainstream media, but create something that can challenge it. We have to become completely viewer supported, or this platform we've built could go away. Don't just watch us, join us. Absolutely. And, I also want to note, I think we've probably talked about this before when I've had you on, but I often say, Israel is the spear of U.S. empire in the Middle East. And in many ways, U.S. imperialism uses Jews as human shields on the front lines of their imperialism against Arab people. And in a way, you have Trump replicating that domestically to push fascistic policies, because at the end of the day, yes, this is absolutely an attack on Palestine solidarity, on anti-genocide protesters. And it's certainly a partnership between the Trump administration and these Zionist organizations against particular people, but it's being used to basically test how far Trump can go in these deportations. I mean, there's a reason he went after Mahmoud Khalil and now Mohsen Mehdawi, who are green card holders. He's trying to set a precedent for stripping people of their green card based on speech he doesn't like. Not doing anything illegal based on speech he doesn't like. And it's the easiest thing to do it over Palestine because institutional power in the US doesn't give a shit about Palestine. Like people, I mean, it's going to be much slower moving for institutions to stand up and say no when everyone's calling this person a Hamas supporter. But this is going to go beyond that. It already is. I mean, not that it's okay, but not every single student visa that's been revoked is of a student who has been protesting against genocide. Those are just the test cases so they can set precedents. So I guess that's just to say it's really extending the use of Jews as human shields in the Middle East to the use of this issue domestically to push fascist policies. And it's just kind of like blows your mind when you think about it like that. And, I think first and foremost, obviously, like the biggest concern should be how this is going to impact very vulnerable people who don't have citizenship, people who are Latino, people who are Arab, people specifically who are Palestinian, because that's the majority of people who are being impacted by this in a horrific way and being put in ICE detention and God being sent to El Salvador to these like prison camps. But I guess, in the distant future, one of the outcomes of this will be, people aren't critical thinkers and they're going to sit there and say, wow, like all this repression in the name of protecting Jews. Well, how does that blow back on Jews,
I can't think of a better way to incite anti-Semitism than by canceling free speech in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. I mean, there is, you recall, during the Republican administration, going back to the first Trump's first term, uh, he was banned from social media. He was his Facebook and Twitter accounts were canceled, and he was outraged. How dare they take away my free speech rights? How dare they uh, uh, cancel me from the public square? And look at what he's doing now. It's hypocrisy to a level I would have never imagined. The right, why were they so anti big tech? Why was there effectively bipartisan support for reining in big tech? Well, on the left, there was a belief that the big tech platforms were spreading misinformation. But why did Republicans also want to clamp down on big tech? Because they were silencing right-wing voices. That was the argument they made for years and years and years, that we are being silenced, that our posts are being suppressed. Big tech is
Mhm.
liberal and big tech is leftist, and they don't. And now look at what they're doing: weaponizing anti-Semitism in the name of of carrying out a genocidal war on Gaza. It's dystopian.
It really is. And then, there's the like other aspect of that. Not other aspects, but I mean, I just, in the Middle East, for example, a region where, there was Jews in many countries, um, Arab Jews all across this region before the introduction of Zionism and the creation of State of Israel. And that changed a lot of things, but not just changed the demographics of the region, but it has actually caused extreme hostility towards Judaism, ju- just Jews in general, across the region, because you have, the Star of David that is on the Israeli flag. You have the Star of David that is on Israel's tanks and on, Israeli army uniforms and on fighter jets. You have the leader of this country repeatedly saying, we're doing this to you in the name of the Jewish people. So the Star of David in this region is really seen as it scares people. They're
Yeah.
afraid, like they feel frightened of it. It's been, I know you've followed stories like this before where, racists, racist Israeli Jews have even attacked Palestinians and branded them with the Star of David. It's, often used as graffiti to mark territory that's been occupied. So yeah, it's seen as a symbol of violence and colonialism and conquering, and this is a symbol that comes to kill you. And I will say, this is Israel, because of Israel's behavior in this region and doing it in the name of Jews. You do have, You'll even have like Holocaust denial in the Middle East because people are like, well, there's no way that really happened because these people are doing this in the name of the Holocaust. Not everybody thinks like that, but that is something you might hear, right? So that's a perfect example of how Zionism, how all of this, how doing this in the name of Jews actually incites a hostility towards Jews. And I mean, if you start doing that domestically, I'm not saying Sheryl Sandberg is ever going to have to hide. I think she's going to be fine. She's got lots of homes to go to no matter what happens. I think American Jews should be fine. I think they deserve to be fine, obviously. But that said, and there is an institutional anti-Semitism in the US, but that says I could see a scenario where you do see blowback or like an attack based on some of this stuff against symbols of Judaism. And it's really upsetting.
The Jewish community needs to do a much better job of disassociating itself from the state of Israel for precisely the reason you're talking about. If you enter a synagogue, for example, if you enter a synagogue in Panama, if you enter a synagogue in Detroit, Michigan, if you enter a synagogue in many places in Europe, you will see the Israeli flag plastered everywhere. That the same Israeli flag that is used and is waved on the destroyed homes of Palestinians in Gaza. We'll get to the Jewish question first, but let's just talk about the enmeshment of pro-Israel speech within the Jewish community. This isn't innocuous cultural heritage, or this isn't innocuous. Oh, let's celebrate, cholent and gefilte fish. No, this is in a synagogue in Detroit, Michigan. It's called the Dat Shalom. You have inside the synagogue, I'm not talking about the hallway, I'm not talking about a lobby, I'm talking about inside the sanctuary itself. You have 240 empty chairs, and each chair with a picture of one of the hostages or prisoners of war. Now, let me ask you, are there 10,000 chairs on the other side for all the Palestinian abductees and prisoners of war and hostages that have been kidnapped? These are Palestinians, by the way, who have not committed a crime. Well, they've committed a crime in the future. That's what they're being charged with, these administrative detainees. People abducted without being charged with anything, so they can't present a legal defense. They're hostages. And by the way, they're hostages also because they're grabbed for the purposes of having more leverage and more prisoners at hand to swap in the eventual prisoner swap that will take place. So they're taken for the same reason that the Israelis were taken. I'm not defending hostage taking on any side. What I'm saying is that they are hostages, but they're unworthy hostages because they're of the incorrect religion. So this is a very political act. Don't tell me this is humanitarian. This is political, because you're putting those chairs there because the victims are Jewish, not Palestinian. So this is political. And so when you see a synagogue politicizing itself, you have to speak out. They sing. Okay, during my childhood, I went to synagogue every single week, and there would be two prayers that would be said for the state of Israel in synagogue Saturday morning every single week. The first would be a prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shabashamayim Tzur Yisrael. The second prayer would be a prayer for the soldiers of the state of Israel, where you're explicitly calling for, that God keep the soldiers of an apartheid state and now a genocidal state safe. How is that not political speech in a synagogue? How does the synagogue not lose its nonprofit status when it's explicitly calling for the safety of soldiers carrying out a genocide? And now let's talk about the issue of the Jewish symbols. As you pointed out, they're weaponizing Jewish symbols. The Star of David branded on Palestinian faces, painted on the destroyed homes of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. You have Israeli soldiers, they're singing the Shema, one of the holiest Jewish prayers that is a declaration, it's essentially the Shahada. It's a declaration that there is only one God. This prayer is being recited as Israeli soldiers are blowing up entire blocks of civilian homes in the Gaza Strip. They're declaring there is one and only one God as they carry out war crimes in view, live streaming themselves on social media. In Judaism, we have a principle called Chilul Hashem, which is that you're not allowed to uh, um, you're not allowed to desecrate God's name. So, for example, if you would be eating a bacon and cheeseburger sandwich, you should not wear a kippah and tzitzit, because eating a bacon and cheeseburger would be a violation of the laws of kashrut, because you're not supposed to eat pork and you're not supposed to mix milk and meat. And so, to wear a kippah and to wear a tzitzit and to be outwardly Jewish while violating Jewish law is a desecration of God's name. Could there be a greater desecration of God's name than to declare there is one God, there's only one God, while you're destroying homes of Palestinians who have done nothing wrong other than be born in the Gaza Strip and be Palestinian? Could there be a greater thing, of a greater desecration of God's name than that? It's disgusting.
It's really, yeah, it's just, oh god, it's like so depressing. It's so depressing. On a slightly like less depressing note, but there's still some depressing aspects to it. I wanted to ask you about something else that happened recently, which I found quite interesting. And that was some changes of views from the author, the historian Tom Segiv, who's written some really good books, which, you know, I've read before. Um, in in a recent interview that Tom Segiv did, I mean, he's quite older now. He says, and actually, this is one of your tweets. You're quoting him in the interview. He says, after World War II, my father decided that he wanted to return to Germany, and he started to correspond with friends from his past. My parents started to plan their return to Germany. They were never Zionists, and they wanted to go home. A month after the last letter my father wrote to a friend about how much he wanted to go back, he was killed. And then you note that Segev forgot to mention that between 1945 to 1948, the Jewish agency in Palestine worked to prevent Jews like his parents from returning home. Instead, the Zionist leadership worked against the interests of Jews in Palestine, collaborating with foreign consular offices to prevent Jews from going home after the war, a policy that Israel continued to pursue in the 1950s. And you have an article about this on your website that you wrote called How Zionists Prevented Jewish Refugees from Returning Home After World War II. And I just wanted to ask you, I guess this has two angles on it. I kind of wanted to ask you to comment on some recent opinions shared by Tom Segev. But before we get to that, I guess, talk about this. I think this is a really it's not a very known story, but it's an important one. Most people after World War II, most Jews wanted to go back home or wanted to go to countries similar to what they were culturally used to. They did not want to go to the Middle East, which makes sense. It's not where they're from. But Zionists did not like that and had other plans. So please explain to our audience what happened there.
So, before and during and after World War II, you had many, many Jews wind up in Palestine. As a result of the war, they fled the violence. They found safe haven in various places around the world. Some of them found safe haven in Palestine. But many of them, after the war, wanted to go home. They wanted to see their family. In many cases, you have, for example, a Jew married to a Christian. The Jew flees, wants to go home, reunite with his or her wife. Or you have, in other cases, a child separated from a mother separated from a daughter, a father separated from her brother. Their brother is still in Europe, liberated from one of the concentration camps. They want to go back and see their brother. In some cases, you even had soldiers who joined, you even had Jews come to Palestine, join these militias. So they fought, they carried arms for the Zionist militias, but they decided they wanted to go home. They were not Zionists. They couldn't acclimate to living a life in Palestine. They wanted to go home. The Zionist community in Palestine worked diligently to prevent those Jews from going home. And if I could just quote an example, who is a French Jew. His name is Samuel Cohen. This is a Zionist, okay? He fought in the Haganah, the pre-state militia, the Israeli army before the Israeli army. And he was originally from France, and he wanted to go home after the 1948 war, but Israel refused to let him leave. Here's a direct quote from him. I served in the Israeli Defense Forces, was wounded and released from the army due to an illness, he wrote. Now I wish to return to France. Holding us against here, Holding us here against our will is a betrayal of trust. I was promised that I would be able to return to France. It is shameful for the state of Israel to keep people here against their will, people who fought in the name of freedom. Those are his words, end quote. So why were they
Wow.
kept in Palestine? Why were they kept in the state of Israel? They were used as demographic hostages. Because what happened in 1948, let's back up a little bit. What happened in 1947 when the UN called for two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state? The problem for the Jews and the Zionists was that within the Jewish state, the proposed Jewish state, there would be about half of the population was still going to be Palestinian. Whereas in the Palestinian state, by the way, it was going to be 99% Palestinian, 1% Jewish. In the Jewish state, it was only going to be about 50-50. And so if Jews started leaving, well, that would be a huge problem because the whole point of Zionism was to create a Jewish majority in a non-Jewish country. And so if Jews are leaving Zion, well, that's a demographic threat. It's just as much a demographic threat as Palestinians returning to their homes after the war. Same problem. You have a government and a society obsessed with demographic engineering. They have been obsessed with demographic engineering for 140 years. I mean, the essence of Zionism is how do we engineer a demographic majority? Well, you do that by kicking Palestinians out, but you also do that by locking Jews in. Or you do that by instigating anti-Semitic incidents all around the world so Jews move to Palestine, which is, by the way, what Israel did in places like Egypt and Iraq. So so this is the core of the Zionist enterprise. It's how do we get Jews here and keep them here? And that's exactly what Israel did from 1945 until 1948. During the 1948 war, by the way, they massively clamped down. In the preceding 3 years, from 45 to 48, they rejected about 50% of the exit permits. So Jews apply to leave. You have to apply for an exit permit to leave. You can't just leave. When you apply, roughly 50% of the time you will be rejected because you're of the wrong religion. Of course, any Palestinian that wants to leave, ahla wa sahla, please, we'll pay for the plane ticket. We'll pay for the train ticket. We'll pay for the bus ride, which is what Israel always does when it's a Palestinian. But if you're a Jew who wants to leave, no way. And just one last point on this. This raises the broader question of, is Zionism all about serving the interests of Jews? No, of course not. Zionism is all about building a Jewish state. And whenever the interests of Jews are in conflict with the interests of building a Jewish state, well, what does the Zionist movement choose? Well, they always choose the latter. And this is a policy that dates all the way to the early 20th century.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.